Hey guys, so not too long ago, I made a winner ranking for the Circle US, and now I want to follow it up with a season ranking where I rank all 5 seasons based on my personal enjoyment of them. Now, again, this is my personal opinion, so you're free to disagree if you want, and I will be spoiling each of these seasons, so if you don't want to be spoiled, don't watch this video. But there are 5 seasons to look at, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So, starting off at number 5, the worst season of the Circle US for me is season 4. And honestly, I feel like this was probably the most boring season, in my personal opinion. But there's definitely some interesting characters. You have people like a Frank, a Trevor, an Alex, even a Carol is interesting at points. However, I feel like compared to other seasons, I feel like we've seen characters like these work out better in other seasons, which we'll be talking about later on. I also didn't really care for the whole Spice Girls twist, where early on the Spice Girls were just part of the game as Jared. Where I know some people talk about them being interesting characters and how this was this big twist for the season, but to be honest, I have no idea who the Spice Girls are. So really, I feel like a lot of this just sort of flew over my head, and I just didn't really care much for it. And I also think the overall level of gameplay isn't as high as I would like, where despite the Circle not being the most strategic game in the world, I feel like compared to seasons 2 and 3, which definitely stepped things up strategically, I think season 4 was absolutely a step down. And I feel like that also really harmed my overall enjoyment of the season. And plus, again, I found it pretty boring throughout. Like, Frank pretty much dominates the game from beginning to end. Despite him not playing that hard, it just seemed like people were rating him highly because he was so well liked throughout the game. So, on the whole, I found the season very underwhelming, both from a gameplay perspective, but from an entertainment perspective as well. So, because of that, I do have it here at number 5. Now, moving on to number 4, and we have a slightly similar season, but we actually have season 1. And for me, season 1's kind of similar to season 4, where despite it seeming like it should be more strategic, I feel like by the end, like you have all these players talking about the importance of building genuine bonds and how that really defines the game. There's also this element of trying to be more educational, where they're trying to show the impact of social media on people's lives, how it drives people to create like a version of themselves that isn't true, and how they're really celebrating people that are trying to be more authentic and trying to break through the filter, which is fine, I guess. But for what I want out of the Circle, which is a game, I didn't really care too much for that. Now, the main thing I will give this season over season 4 is one, the fact that it is season 1 and people are still trying to learn the game. And through that, we had some pretty interesting gameplay early on where you have the rise and fall of Antonio. I do find that pretty entertaining. I also think this cast is a bit better than season 4's, where you have some pretty iconic characters like Joey, Shuby, even people like a Mercedes is pretty interesting. So you definitely have some interesting characters there. And just seeing these players learning the game, and there's this element of the players learning more about the game and setting the meta as the season goes along, which, despite the meta not ultimately being super interesting by the end of it, I still find that element of discovery to be pretty interesting. So I think those are factors that make the season a bit higher for me. But at the end of the day, I still find it pretty underwhelming. So because of that, I do have it here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we actually have the most recent season on the board, and here we have season 5. Now I do think season 5 suffers from similar issues to seasons 1 and 4, in that there's this big emphasis on social bonds, where even the players dominating the game and Chaz and Raven place such a heavy emphasis on being open with each other and how bonds matter more than strategy, which is a bit underwhelming. Although, as I talked about in my power rankings, I do think Chaz was still someone that was actively playing the game, despite him talking a lot about like building these bonds and being open and just focusing on the relationship aspect to it. However, I do think there's a bit more going on in the season compared to those other 2 seasons, where you have the entire Marvin situation. Like, Marvin is just a fascinating character, and it's kind of a shame we didn't get him on Big Brother 24, although him being on the season, I think, elevated it to a degree. And while I don't actually agree with people like a Raven, like disparaging Marvin over something that probably could have been construed as a game move, and then later on, you have Chaz and Oliver having a flirtmance and Chaz going along with it, despite what happened with Marvin and Raven and Tamira, which is a bit hypocritical, but again, is something at least. So, but it's still a somewhat entertaining thing. You also have the entire run of Jennifer, where you have Brett from Big Brother and Xanthi working together to run the game there. And while it is a flawed game that does result in them being last in the final ratings, it still was an interesting run and added a level of strategy that was probably missing for season 4, in my personal opinion. You also have Shubi's run, like his rise and fall, which is pretty entertaining as well. Just Shubi trying so hard to play the game strategically, only for no one to really go along with his plans and him not really gaining much trust by him playing as a catfish. And then the whole newbie alliance that he reveals in his farewell message, just contributing to all this like chaos that really defines the game moving forward. So I feel like there's a bit more going on in this season compared to the other ones. It does have it a bit higher for me, but again, it still has certain things I don't like. So because of that, I do have it here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and this is a season that I definitely enjoy more than the others, although it's still not perfect. But here we have season 2, and I feel like this season is definitely a step up from the others. Now, I don't necessarily agree with the idea that it's more strategic than the other seasons, where we definitely see people like Courtney and River try to play more strategically. Although even then, I don't think they necessarily make all the correct moves. We obviously had the Terra Alicia and Savannah war that takes place early on that's very entertaining there. And moving forward, we see like people like Mitchell and Kat try to counter Courtney and River, only for them to come up short. He obviously has some pretty notable characters. I think Chloe's a pretty interesting character. I think Delisha is interesting in playing as Trevor, even though I said before that I don't think she does a good job as playing as the catfish. I also think Jack is a very interesting character as well, where he tries to play as a catfish. You could tell that he is one of these players that watches Survivor and Big Brother and wanted to play a more strategic game, only for him to blow up his game during the makeup challenge, where he just has no idea how to apply makeup, which completely blows his cover as a catfish. And by the end, while I don't think that Alicia is necessarily a dominant winner, I still think it's a satisfying outcome for the season. So on the whole, I still think this is a very enjoyable season, and one in which, at least compared to the others, they were at least trying to play more strategically than the others, and it still has plenty of entertaining moments within it. But I feel like there's a pretty clear number 1 for me, so because of that, I do have to leave it here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the best season of the Circle US is season 3. And for me, this is the pretty definitive best season, where I feel like it's pretty consistently entertaining throughout, where early on you have the whole Blue Michelle and Orange Michelle situation, just seeing both Michelles playing pretty terribly, with even the real Michelle not really knowing how to react to this. And while you could say that she gets screwed over at the end due to the fake Michelle winning out, I still think like her run was pretty interesting, all things considered. But really, the main thing that drives the season for me is the strategy. I feel like this is the most strategic season of the Circle, where you have Nick coming in and really trying to play this game strategically, and he is effective in building this alliance, the band that more or less runs the game. And just interesting to see Nick running around and doing his best to navigate towards the game. And while it is a bit unsatisfying at the end where he gets tanked in the ratings due to him being a big threat, I still admire that he was able to dominate the game as much as he did before the end, at least. But even then, I still think James is also a satisfying winner, where despite him coming in late, he is another player that comes in and is able to join the counter alliance that forms in response to Nick. And while they're unsuccessful in targeting Nick or his allies, it's still an interesting war to see playing out, and definitely a bit more extensive than the Terra Alicia and Savannah feud from season 2. So I feel like through that, this is a pretty entertaining season because of that. And while at the end of the day, I feel like The Circle is not as good of a show as Survivor Big Brother, I still feel like this is a relatively strong season of the show. So because of that, I do have it here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Now I have more content like this moving forward, so stay tuned for that. We have other seasons of shows coming up soon, like Australian Survivor and eventually Survivor 44, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that's the video. See ya.